Before we get started, please do put yourselves on mute to mitigate any echoes. You can type your questions in chat or raise your hand, and we'll take all of those at the end of the presser. If you have technical difficulties, just send me an email. So Eric, we are good. We're live, and Commissioner Grove, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Licia. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. It's been more than a month since we last gathered together to talk about Minnesota's employment picture, and that's a yearly pattern that exists in the way that employment data is released by the federal government. It has to do with taking a moment in February to kind of revise the previous year's numbers based on looking at actual population data versus survey data and making some shifts to seasonal adjustments. All that to say, we as state governments across the country take February off from doing a jobs report, and then March we do the January jobs report in addition to updating those revisions, which we'll talk about today. And then in 2 weeks from now, we'll do another jobs report focused on February. So you'll get a double dose of us over the next few weeks as we continue to share what we are learning about Minnesota's employment picture, and eager to answer your questions and walk through the latest information today. So if you go to mn.gov/deed, you will see our press release. I think it's just been put out with the numbers for January, and you'll also see these revisions from March. And you'll see largely very good news. We've continued 4 months straight now of job growth, which we're very excited about. January, despite being a difficult month with the surge of Omicron, we saw 10,200 new jobs on a seasonally adjusted basis in January. So we were uncertain of what exactly the jobs picture would look like during that January month when rates for COVID were quite high in the state, but the economy really performed, brought in 10,200 new jobs. And across a whole host of sectors. We were really glad to see leisure and hospitality continue to grow, 1,800 new jobs there. We're hearing that businesses across the state are having a little bit better luck in hiring in that space. Manufacturing, one of the powerhouses of Minnesota's economy, was up 1,600 jobs. Financial activities saw a 1,200 job jump, and professional and business services went up 3,600 jobs as well. Really, the only two industries where we saw any loss in January were construction, which was down 1,400, and of course, that's no surprise in the coldest month of the year in Minnesota. And then trade, transportation, utilities was down about 500 as well. So those were not shocking dips, but on the whole, seeing those increases across the economy, again, for the fourth straight month, and I'll add the largest job uptick since last July, was really a good start to the year for Minnesota's economy. We got off to a good start as 2022 began. We face a whole host of uncertainties on the horizon ahead, with the situation in Russia and Ukraine, of course, and the energy crisis that seems to be sparking. But we know that January was a good month for us as we started the year off. Big picture, because we always like to kind of back up and look at this journey we've all been through together. We lost about 417,000 jobs from February to April of 2022, and we've since gained back about 71% of those jobs lost on a seasonally adjusted basis. So we've gained back almost 300,000 jobs of that 417,000, and we certainly hope to see those trends continue, and the market data we're seeing right now indicates that they should. Labor force participation rate, a number that we have all focused a lot on over the last couple of years, just given the major shifts in our labor market, have risen. Revisions from last year put the rate at 67.3% in December, but an uptick of a significant amount, up to 0.3 percentage point for January of 2022 at 67.6% as our labor force participation rate. That outpaced the nation's rise in participation of labor. The nation went up just 0.1 percentage point in January, so we are outpacing the nation on getting more people back into the labor market here in Minnesota. Unemployment rate also dipped down, which is great, from 3.0% down to 2.9%. So we're now under that 3% mark again, which we had just done right before the pandemic in the months leading up to it there. So that is good news. But I think always important to point out there that the disparities you see in employment when you look at the adjusted unemployment rate by race, which again looks at a 12-month moving average and also combines not only those who are unemployed, but those who are looking for work and would have been expected to be working, shows major gulfs between Black Minnesotans, Hispanic Minnesotans, and white Minnesotans, almost double of an adjusted unemployment rate for our Black Minnesotans in the labor market compared to white workers. So that remains a key challenge we face in our economy, and it's why you'll see in the governor's budget so many components of our economic agenda focused on leveling those disparities out and making significant strides for equity in our economy. It is an absolute economic imperative in Minnesota right now, and these numbers just continue to show why that's the case. I will say that the broader economic trend on everyone's mind, of course, is inflation. You've seen that at the gas pump. You've seen that in the grocery store. It remains a real challenge in Minnesota. We've seen inflation and the CPI index up by, I think, 7.5% last we checked, but I believe even this morning the numbers are more like 7.9% over the year from the latest reports. And when you compare that to the wage growth in Minnesota, which is only 6.7% over the last year, inflation is outpacing wage growth, and that remains a challenge. When you look at it on a 2-year timeline, we're doing a little bit better. Wage growth is up about 11% compared to 9% on the inflation number. So we are outpacing it on a 2-year timeline. But I think consumers are not looking at 2-year timelines when they're looking at price tags at the grocery store and the gas pump. And so inflation and wage growth remain something we're tracking closely. And that, of course, the Fed is tackling themselves here in the coming weeks, as we all know. I'll take a minute to talk about the annual revision piece of this. There's more in the press materials, and Angelina, who's our real expert here, is our research director, can answer further questions on the details of this. But essentially, there's two areas of data that get adjusted every year to get a better look at what's happened over the last year. One focuses on employment, the other focuses on jobs. And both studies are re-examined by looking at the seasonal adjustment numbers based on what actually happened over the seasons in the last year. And they add new population controls to the current population survey. So, rather than just using survey data, we start to use actual population estimates based off of the census. And it can make a significant difference in the numbers over the previous year. So whereas we're operating on kind of a survey basis for most of the year, it's this kind of population projection change based off census data that shifts the numbers that we look at on a quarterly basis. So the revised numbers you see in this report for the last year do offer a couple of new insights about what's happened in Minnesota's economy. One of the things is that we discovered that our unemployment rate dropped more quickly than we originally estimated starting in December of 2020. Our original estimate for January of 2021 was 4.5%, but revisions put it at 4.2%, so that drop was a little quicker. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier before, our labor force participation rate was a little lower than surveys had estimated. It was actually 67.3% by December, which is about 0.4 of a percentage point lower than originally published. Again, just as the common revisions we make every year. But again, the good news is we more than made up that ground in January with that bump back up that we talked about a moment ago. So we can go into some of the details of that if it's interesting to any of the reporters on the call, but did want to mention some of those changes that we saw shifting. So we're excited about this jobs report. I think it's good to see us kicking off to a good start as the year begins. We are tracking very closely the situation abroad, and we know that the economy is in a very fluid state right now. And at the same time, I think to see a good jobs month right in the middle of a surge of COVID at the start of the year is really, I guess, encouraging for us and gives us some optimism at this moment. And we know that our workforce shortage in the state remains the #1 challenge we're trying to save as an agency. We have 205,000 job vacancies open in the state, 40,000 of those in healthcare, which is a major crisis on the workforce front. It is an all hands on deck effort here at DEED and across state government to do everything we can to help both employers and job seekers find roles. And so many of the things we've talked about over the past few months that we're doing, we've only accelerated at this time and continue to see some progress there. But we know the work has a long road ahead of us. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to our research director, Angelina Nguyen, who you met in January for the first time. She oversees our LMI office as well. She'll get into some of the details here and then eager to answer your questions. Angelina, over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hi, everyone. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about visual graphs that kind of re-summarize what the commissioner has covered, but it gives you a longer trend over time. So this first one is looking at unemployment rate and number of jobs. So the blue line and the green line there is the number of, blue line is number of total non-farm payroll jobs, and green line is total private sector jobs. And they're both trending in the right direction. So over the last month, we gained 10,200 jobs in the total non-farm, and the private sector gained 9,100 jobs. So, which is a huge, huge gain. That is a 4-month streak counting, so that is a good direction to trend in. And then the bars are the unemployment rate, and as the commissioner mentioned, we ticked down 0.1% from 3.0 to 2.9% over the last month, so also trending well. Next graph. And then the next slide is going to be adding the unemployment rate. Can you guys still hear me okay? Okay, so thank you, Alicia. So this one is looking at unemployment rate and labor force participation rate change by race. So the green bars are the unemployment rate, and then the blue bars are the labor force participation rate change. So this shows us the number of people in January who are either actively seeking for work or who would have been expected to be working or looking for work if it weren't for the pandemic. And as you can see over time, the recovery has been different for different groups. So our Black Minnesotans are having a harder time with getting back into the workforce and finding employment compared to our white Minnesotans. Our Hispanic Minnesotans have actually increased in their labor force participation rate, but unemployment rate is still somewhat higher compared to the white group. And we're not showing Asian data here. I want to mention that because the number in the sample is too small to be reliable. But that is something that I want to point out. But we are very aware of keeping track of as much racial data as we can. Next slide, please. So the next slide will show you the same analysis, but by gender for men and women. And the story here is they look similar. So again, green bar is unemployment rate and blue bar is labor force participation rate change. So you can see that towards the beginning of the pandemic, women dropped out of the labor force at a higher rate than men, but they've both recovered and are looking pretty similar over time. I know that the story, the popular story has been that women with young children are struggling to participate in the labor force. Our data, we don't have enough data to like track to separate the women with young children from just general the women population. So if you look overall, just separated by gender, the two groups are doing similar. Next slide, please. So this one shows over the year employment change by super sector. So this is not seasonally adjusted data. So for most of our sectors are doing well. 4 super sectors have negative annual growth, which is construction, which the commissioner covered is January. So it makes sense. The construction is down 0.1%. Trade, transportation, and utilities is down 0.6%. And most of that is driven by wholesale trade and retail trade, but warehousing, transportation, and utilities grew 3.5%. And then financial activities is also down 0.9%. Mostly due to a decline in finance and insurance, but real estate and rental and leasing grew by 4.2%. And then education and health services is down 0.4%. And that is mostly driven by hospitals, nursing, and residential care facilities drop. 2 of the super sectors experience huge over-the-year gains, and they are leisure and hospitality, which gained 26.7%, which translates to about 48,500 jobs, and other services also gained 8.9%, which is almost 9,000 jobs. Next slide, please. And then this graph looks at recovery since the pandemic by sector. So the blue bar is the percentage of jobs that were lost. And then the green bar is the percentage of the jobs that we've recovered. So as you can see, the private sector has regained 75% of the jobs lost, and on a whole, we have regained 71% of the jobs lost. And the sectors that are closest to full recoveries are local government, information, wholesale trade, financial services, or financial activities, and state government. The sectors that are still struggling a little bit are arts and recreation, accommodation and food services, administrative and support services, educational services. But we are on the right track. So that is all for the slides. And we'll take questions now.
Great. Thanks, Angelina. And to our reporters on the line, would love to answer any questions you might have. Please use the hand raising feature if you're able, and we'll fire away. Kavita.
Hi, Commissioner. Hi, Angelina. Nice to meet you virtually. Just I had a question about the Black unemployment rate. We had seen it dropping, quite a bit, I guess like mid-year, I don't know, summer, fall of 2021, but it's jumped back up in recent months. Any thoughts about what might be going on there? Because it did seem initially like the tight labor market was pulling more Black Minnesotans into the labor force, but why do you think it's going back up?
Yeah, Angelina, you may have some thoughts on this too. I think one of the challenges we've had with this data is that the sample size is low, and so we've tried to really hone in on that 12-month moving average number is the best shot we have at a stronger sample set. So, back when we saw it dropping 6 months ago, and I'm glad you raised this and that you remember it. Even then, we were kind of cautious, like this doesn't quite look right to us based on what we're hearing and based on the sample size. So, I don't know that I would draw the conclusion that something great was happening and then now something bad's happening. I think it's a little bit of a data issue, but I don't know, Angelina, if you want to add any thoughts to that. I think it's still a stunning disparity that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Commissioner. And also, there's a little lag in the data. So this is the graph where you saw the race breakdown is a 12-month moving average. And there's a little few months lag. So I would not interpret it literally as the representative of the current month that we're talking about, because it's taking an average over 12 months.
And Orion, as you might have seen in the chat, just dropped a great piece that Alicia Liebert from our team wrote about sort of who's getting left behind in this recovery. And one of the primary points that piece makes is that people of color are chief among the groups that are struggling to re-enter the labor market at wage levels that are stronger than they left it, for sure.
Yeah, we're able to provide a lot more detail from this analysis than we ever could from the unemployment rates. It's also, quite well. The currency is actually back to second quarter 2021, so it's a full year of the experience of our labor market during the COVID period. But we're able to provide really a lot more detail because we have a population of workers who have been unemployed as a result of COVID to look at, rather than a small sample.
Other questions from our friends in the press?
I'll ask one more if no one else has something. Was just wondering if you talk a little bit about wage growth. It seems like wage growth, even though it's not keeping up with inflation, it did rise. From what I remember, I feel like we were more in the 5-ish% range in recent months. And I think you said this month, it's more in the 6% range. So can you talk a little bit about what sectors? I mean, obviously, we know hospitality has been seeing, or food and restaurants have been seeing a big bump. Any other sort of sectors where you're seeing big bumps in wages or not much movement at all?
Yeah, the overall rate is 6.7%, so we're almost at 7% wage growth over the last year. You're right about hospitality up, I think, over 10%. Tech is up over 10%. Angelina, do you have a further industry breakdown of the wage growth that we've seen?
Orion, I will hand that to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, the one that's really going, really growing very fast these past couple of months has been nursing and residential care facilities. I've been doing a little digging and asking folks at the Department of Health what might be going on there. It may be some temporary supports in that industry that are allowing wages to rise right now to attract workers. So, but I don't have the details on that. So that might be something to dig into. The food service sector is still really showing very strong job growth. Other sectors are, remaining around, sort of that 6% growth that we've been seeing.
Other questions? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to, but you had mentioned that you were hearing from the hospitality sector that they seem to be having a little bit easier time finding workers. Can you talk a little bit about that? Any sense of like maybe why, or were they previous hospitality workers, or people from other industries, or I don't know, any sort of like more info you might have about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's anecdotal. I mean, I think the data shows, you can see the job increases in the data too. But I think in talking to Hospitality Minnesota, other trade groups, they are seeing some momentum, but still a crisis. Nobody's saying this is by any means over. I think this will be with us for a while. But there's been a surge in focus on raising wages, on creating better work hours, on kind of reimagining the workplace to make sure that it makes sense for workers. And there's also some really innovative efforts out there. I mean, I spent about an hour or so on Tuesday with Hospitality Minnesota and our Explore Minnesota Tourism Department at the Pro Start Hospitality Competition, which gets a bunch of high school students to go out and compete in a cooking competition and also a business planning competition for creating a food truck or a small business. I mean, this kind of focus on the pipeline early to create the next generation of hospitality leaders is, I think, a really critical part of the equation. But I think the raw numbers of this bear circling back on as well. And we've talked about this before, but we're not going to see our labor force shortage meaningfully shift until we can do the following three things. One, get more people to move to our state. We lost about 10,000 citizens last year, and that has to be reversed. We have to be a talent attractor, and that's a huge factor. Second is just activating pools of labor in our market right now that are underutilized, and I get back to those equity numbers. There's a lot of solutions hiding in plain sight for employers to find new workers for their businesses, and we are seeing more and more businesses in our interactions with them warming up to finding workers in new communities. Also looking at people with disabilities who they might have otherwise overlooked. You are seeing HR departments get more nimble as this shortage goes on. And the third is automation. It's less focused on the people, but the very basic realization that firms are going to need to automate more effectively to both create jobs that are attractive because they involve working with machines and not hard manual labor, but also simply just to increase productivity at a time of a labor shortage. So it's always helpful to remember, and this comes up a lot, that we were, because of demographic reasons, already predicting a drop in labor force participation before the very first COVID case hit Minnesota. And so this was in many ways just an acceleration of a trend line, but we've got our work cut out for us. And all three of those vectors of tackling our workforce shortage, we have dollars in the governor's budget focused on them, whether it's marketing our state or new workforce programs or automation loans. And we also have existing programs at DEED that we're really pushing heavily on because they're needed. And this is a crisis that involves far more than just one solution to tackle. Maybe just to add another flavor to this, and I read it this morning, a Pew Research piece that asked workers why they're leaving. Everyone's following the Great Resignation, and the number one reason was jobs weren't paying enough. Number two reason was people didn't feel like they had a career path ahead of them. Number three reasons was not feeling respected in the workplace. So those three reasons right there are all about things that, you know, businesses can and are addressing. The fourth reason was childcare. Number one kind of social issue that was focused on in that Pew Research study was childcare. So we remain very focused on the childcare component of this too. Well, I know we're almost at time. Any final questions from the media before we wrap? Great. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we appreciate it. You'll see us again in 2 weeks. If you'll care to join us, we'd love to have you, where we'll talk about February's numbers as well, and hopefully we'll see a similar trend line up. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day.